witches in Macbeth may seem like pure theater. Obviously, for us, they're incredibly famous. I think they're probably the most well-known character from Shakespeare's plays. I mean, they might fight a little bit with Romeo and Juliet in terms of being recognizable, but most people, even if you're not a Shakespeare fan, knows who these are. But when you look at the history of Shakespeare and his plays, for his audience, witchcraft and witches were terrifyingly real. To dive into this history a little further, we're going inside some of this history to explain what exactly was going on with the real witches from Shakespeare's lifetime. That's what's happening right now on That Shakespeare Life. In the late 16th century, thousands of people were accused of witchcraft in England and Scotland. This was bolstered, I guess, in no small part by King James I, because he was incredibly anti anything to do with demons, witches, or the occult. And he wrote an entire book on demonology, positioning himself as an expert in this field. So he was really pushing the let's find the witches and make sure that they're executed. And so when Shakespeare is having witches appear in his play and they are chanting spells, his audiences it wasn't just the spooky factor for the sake of the story. It was not purely entertainment. These were people that the audience members would have thought could have been real. So it was deeply unsettling to see them acting out on stage things that people in the audience believed could actually harm them. So to find out more about witchcraft and how it influences plays like Macbeth and what we should understand about that history when we're seeing it appear on stage, I sat down with arguably the foremost expert in witches from the early modern period, and that is Marian Gibson. She knows all there is to know, so she could definitely answer our questions. And here's what she had to say.
Agnes is accused alongside Gilly. She was known as Annie. That was her nickname, in the same way that Gellis was called Gilly. And she was a slightly different type of woman. She was a mother, we know, because she talks about some of her children. And in fact, her daughter was accused alongside of her, and meets the same fate as her mother, I'm sorry to say. She was quite poor. She talks about the way that she lives in poverty. And she says, really touchingly, there's this really touching human moment. She says she had to share a bed with her children in order to keep warm. You know, they lived in some very small place, and they were cold and they were hungry. And one of the ways that she earned money was rather like Gilly. She did other things alongside whatever it was that she did for an ordinary living, which we don't actually know. She said that she set herself up as a healer, as a kind of magical fortune telling healing woman. And she would go around in her community, and say these prayers and charms over people, which she thought would heal them. She said that she learned them from her father. And some of them are absolutely mainstream Christian. It's really interesting to see the way in which, as we were saying earlier, almost any kind of utterance by a woman could become suspicious, even if it's the most Christian thing you ever heard. So Gilly's saying these prayers, versions of the Christian creed that people say in church, and people are pointing the finger at her and saying, but you're a witch. It was very difficult for her to exit from that position, and she didn't, in fact, manage it. She was tortured in the same way as Gilly was, and again forced to speak directly with the king. She ends up telling the king, you know, woman to man, this amazing story about how she supposedly knew what he had said to his new wife, Anne of Denmark, on their wedding night. She describes an occasion when she tells him about an attempt to poison him, which interestingly makes use of toads and poison and other things that turn up in Macbeth as well. And she ends up confessing all this stuff about how the witches christened a cat, she said, and threw it into the sea as this sort of barbaric anti-Christian rite, and how the witches attacked King James at sea when he was bringing his new wife back from Denmark, and all this stuff. So Annie's evidence alongside Gilly's is really the kind of the backbone of the case that Shakespeare knew. He gets a lot of his stories, he gets a lot of the energy of his witchcraft stories from those.
The Witches of Macbeth show us how theater is a reflection of the real things going on in Shakespeare's lifetime. The fears and the suspicions that were going on for the real people, they're reflected onto the stage. It's what gives the stage its power because it was connecting with the audience in that way. To hear our entire episode with Marian Gibson and learn so much more about witches from Shakespeare's lifetime, you can listen to our entire podcast episode at the link below this video. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.